Okay, now it's live, and what I have to do is I have to flip over to a new tab and grab the chat so we can see what people are typing. One second. All right, yeah, they're starting to pour in now. Okay, let me grab the chat. And are you able to get the chat as well?
Yep, I have it in front of me.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna grab it also. Perfect. Can everyone hear us okay? Hey, what's happening, lawn care? Is the audio okay? Cedric, do you want to do an audio test real quick?
Yep. So is everyone also hearing me well?
Nice, okay. All right, so we'll officially start at 9 o'clock. I just want to give everyone a chance to pile in. As you guys can see, Cedric has done us a wonderful favor, and he's pulled all 3 TVs together with a few test patterns. So you guys are going to be able to ask us some more technical questions, and hopefully Cedric will be able to address some of those questions for you.
Yep. So right now we have the Q9F at the bottom right, on the bottom left, the Z9D, and on the top, the Q8F. Both the Samsung TVs are the 2018 models, not the 2017.
Good call out. All right, so we'll officially start at 9 o'clock. Feel free to start asking any questions in the chat. So what's your impression so far of the Q8 and Q9?
They are great TVs so far. We haven't completed the testing on both of them. The one that we're most far into testing is the Q8, which is going to be published this week, the review, and next week we're going to publish the review of the Q9. But from what we've seen so far, both are great TVs and improvement compared to the 2017 models.
Okay. We don't have to do a drop test this year, do we?
Hopefully not.
Okay. You know what's funny is the Q8 actually looks brighter than the Q9, at least over the video stream.
Might be a little bit maybe because of the angles and maybe the settings. I can double check just the measurements. The Q8 is at 104. The Q9 is currently at 99 minutes. And the Z9 is at 104. So the Q9 right now is slightly below 100 nits. So they are somewhat similar.
Right. And you've already had time to calibrate the Q8 and the Q9, right?
Yep. Both are calibrated right now.
Very nice. Okay. Okay, we have some questions starting to roll in. Yeah, we'll talk about some OLEDs, Frank, probably midway through the session. Okay, so officially we start at 9, but I guess we can kind of get the ball rolling. This is recorded, so people can go back and rewatch this later. So what are your initial thoughts, just from your average consumer perspective, on the Q8? I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on the Q8, as you've spent actually more time with that one than the Q9 so far.
So far with our testing, it's a great TV so far, an improvement compared to last year. It seems that for an LCD TV, it does, at least for most of it things, it does it well. So it's a good LCD TV. It might be one of the best we've tested so far for as far as LCD TVs goes. So
Right.
definitely a great, everything is great so far.
Okay. And how would you say it compares to any of the LCD TVs last year? So if you had to pick a TV from 2017, what would you say it's closest to?
Closest to, it's a bit hard because for Samsung TVs last year, there was no full array. So it's a bit hard to compare. It's definitely better than last year, 2017 Q8C that we have. It's better in a lot of ways. It's brighter. Local dimming is better, so it has better blacks. So it's definitely an improvement compared to last year.
Would you say the 2017 940E would be a competitor? I mean, I know you have I think you have a 65-inch version, right?
The 940E, we have the 75-inch.
Well, your Q8.
Oh, the Q8, we have the 55-inch of last year. Both this year and last year is 55-inch we have.
Okay. So that's not apples to apples. Okay. Yeah, I know in the larger sizes, some people are still comparing the X940E from last year to some of these Samsungs. So I think we were trying to pinpoint which one's closest to it.
It's a good question. It depends for what. Depends for what. It's some things the 940 is going to do better. Otherwise, sometimes the QLEDs are going to be better. It depends. For us, the 940E had a little bit of a problem for response time. So like a lot of motion blurs, long transitions on our unit. But for these, at least for the Samsung we have, they don't have that issue. So as far as that part of motion for the response time, the QLEDs are better than our unit for the 75-inch 940.
Right. And so in my initial testing of the Q8, I'm finding it maybe a little bit tough to quantify upgrading to the Q9 for most people. From my learnings, it's just a little bit brighter, a little bit better light control, but I think you guys also were experiencing some interesting local dimming issues as well. Would you be comfortable sharing your local dimming findings?
Yeah, we're still in the process of testing, but both our Q8 and Q9, we had a little bit of problem calibrating due to the local dimming being a little bit too aggressive on the 18% window that we use to calibrate. And now Samsung told us a trick to put the AutoMotion Plus to custom, and it helped a little bit stabilize the gamma, so we were able to calibrate to our target better this way. But so as for the difference, so far it's a bit early to say in our testing. It does seem the Q9 to be better, but how big of a difference, we're not sure yet, and we're not sure if it's worth it yet.
Right.
We're going to know more once we test more the Q9.
Makes sense. So Samsung confirmed that their local dimming is somehow tethered to the AutoMotion Plus settings.
I'm not sure if it's not exactly what they mentioned. For our issue that we were having to calibrate, so our exact issue we were having is we calibrate to a 100 nits target,
right?
And we're using an 18% window. And in the gamma curve for this by default was really bad. But as soon as we put a full screen window, then it was fine. Or if we increase the backlight, it was fine. But at low backlight for an 18% window, we were having issues. And Samsung told us a trick to set AutoMotion Plus to custom, which is a little bit strange because AutoMotion Plus, that setting is not really related to this, but it did help fix a little bit our issues for calibration.
Okay, makes sense. A lot of us won't be calibrating our TVs. So what did you think of my bad settings video from the other day?
They were interesting. I wouldn't say they were the best, but definitely there's some things there's room for improvements, especially if you aim for accuracy.
Right, and that's a large part of the reason for this session is how can we arrive to a more accurate picture without having to become ISF certified or hire a calibrator. I'm not saying that people shouldn't, but there are a lot of folks that either don't know about professional calibration or they're just not willing to do it. And so it's really funny when people ask me for my settings. The first thing I think of is, really, you want my settings? They're going to be horrible. I post them and I take it on the chin, but I would rather send them to you for the more generalized settings or recommendations. So where do you think people should start first to get a more accurate picture?
For someone normal, it's somewhat easy with today's TVs because usually you can get it in, let's say, movie mode for Samsung TVs, and you're gonna get very close to the target, maybe like 90% there, just by default movie mode, plus a little bit of small tweak here and there. If you like do all the tweaks without any tools, you can get maybe 95% there. So is it worth it to get the last 5%? Well, it depends. Probably not for a normal consumer unless the TV has a certain issue. So it depends. But you can, just by having like a good picture mode, the basic setting can get you 90% there, which is close enough for a lot of people.
So for the Q8FN and the Q9FN, you say movie mode is the most accurate out of the box?
Yes.
Okay. And post calibration, what did you find to be the most inaccurate? Was it the grayscale color? What required really the most tweaking for you?
It's a good question. Usually, like, at least for these two, the grayscale is a little bit hard sometimes to calibrate, whereas the color is somewhat easier. But it really depends on the unit. Sometimes you can get a unit that takes twice as much time to do. It varies a lot, the complexity. So it's hard. It's hard to answer.
Right. And speaking of color, a lot of people say that the QLED TVs have significantly better color. Now, as you know, I personally make extremely high quality videos for my other work. So it's important to me. But for the average consumer who's watching Blu-rays, they're streaming, watching cable TV, do you think they're really going to see a difference in a QLED TV versus a Sony, 2018 Sony X900F, for example?
As far as color gamut, we definitely measure a difference with QLED TVs compared to the rest. So it's the difference is measurable. Now, is it a big one and is it worth the difference? It's kind of hard because it depends on the scene that you're going to watch. For some scene, especially if it's resaturated content like animation or a kids movie, it's going to be more noticeable. Is it big, the difference? For most scene, no, but some scene, yes. So is it worth it just for that alone? Probably not, but it is a plus, and it is a noticeable difference if you watch certain scenes.
Demos.
Yeah.
Okay. And what do you think about the viewing angle? So it was kind of touted that the new coating on the Q8 and Q9, well, actually the Q7 as well, improved viewing angles. Did you see any improvement yourself?
No, I mean it's VA panels, so it behaves like VA panels. It does lose saturation at an angle. Now, technically, since in front the colors can be more saturated, it's gonna be less bad at an angle, but it's still not great at an angle, no matter what. So definitely, if you are sitting on the side, either OLED or on IPS TV is gonna be better than a VA LCD.
Right. And what do you think about reflections on it?
It's great. Definitely great for both the Q8 and Q9. Definitely great.
Okay. Let me check the live stream to see if anybody has any questions. Does the 75-inch, this is a question from Boyzus or Boyzeus, does the 75-inch Q9FN have more zones than the 65-inch?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer on top of my head.
Okay. I think someone did count the zones and it was exactly the same, but I personally haven't verified myself either. Okay. What is the Q9FN input lag?
We haven't measured it yet. We did, I believe, measure the Q8 input lag, so it's probably going to be the same ballpark. Let me check our measurements.
Did you have any issues measuring the input lag?
It depends what you mean by issues. Measuring input lag is not an always easy process. Depending on the different resolution of the TVs, it's not always an easy process. But I don't think we had any specific issues for these two TVs for as far as input lag goes. So input lag seems great on the Q8, at least that we measured. Seems to be about below 20 milliseconds on most signal, which is great.
Okay, and I tested both of them gaming. I turned on, or in game mode, I enabled all the motion settings. I didn't notice any difference in input lag with the motion settings enabled versus them disabled.
Yeah, that's something great that Samsung added this year. It's the motion interpolation in-game mode that doesn't add much input lag. It's not for everyone because there's a downside to interpolation. There's artifacts, things like that. But I mean, for increasing frame rate, especially on console with 30 frames per second games, it makes a big difference.
Right. Okay, here's a big question. When is Samsung bringing VRR and FreeSync to their TVs? This is from Kyle. And is it FreeSync 1 or 2?
It's a good question. We don't know that answer, unfortunately.
Okay. I see it in the Xbox One X menu, but it's grayed out for me. So I tried testing it, but I wasn't able to. I think Digital Foundry, I think they've been testing it somehow, but at least on these TVs, I wasn't able to successfully test it.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be a pretty popular question. So LG C8 or the Q9FN, just your early thoughts.
The C8 versus Q9FN, it depends. Both are great, but for different needs. So it really depends on the needs and what kind of content you watch, what kind of lighting you have in your room. Like if you are in a pure dark room, like home theater, the C8 has better blacks. There's no way around it. So, and you don't need necessarily the high peak brightness in a dark room because it might be too much. So C8 dark room wins. Bright room, it's more complex because it gets brighter, the Q9, but usually some people have like large living room, then you lose colors at an angles, which C8 will maintain. So if you have a lot of lights, Q9 is gonna win. Average room, bright room where you need wide seating position, you might want to consider the OLED for this wide seating. If you're always in front though, in a medium light room, probably maybe the Q9, but it depends on your usage.
Okay. And here's the big question. I don't know what that was. The Z9D or the Q9FN?
It's a good question. Unfortunately, we don't have enough data yet to make the claim of which one is better. We just started testing a few days ago the Q9, so we don't know. It seems to be that some one is better for some things, one the other, but we are not sure exactly which one wins overall yet.
I do know one thing. For serious gamers, the Q9FN.
Probably, yeah. Input lag is lower, which just that alone makes a difference for some people.
Right. I think for movies, though, the jury's still out, and it depends on what you're used to.
Yeah, it could be.
From your experience, now I've been used to Sony's motion for quite a while, and I haven't had a Samsung TV. It's probably been 6 months because I sold my KS8000. Could you maybe explain like the difference in motion on a Samsung TV versus Sony?
It's a very hard question to answer because motion is really complex in the sense that it has multiple components and bunch of components that are sometimes hard to understand or hard to see depending on what you watch. So it's hard to generalize. It's going to depend on the actual model. For us, let's say compare these two, the Z9D on our unit. So we have the 65-inch, has a long response time. So on that one, it has more motion blur than on the or Q9. Although we heard some reports that the 75-inch Z9D has less response time, so less motion blur issues. In general, though, it's hard to say which one wins. The Sony has a little bit more control over some settings, so that helps a little bit. But promotion, it's going to be hard. It's going to depend on the model. It's going to depend on what you're watching and what kind of aspect you're sensitive into motion. Like some people like flickering, some people don't like flickering, so it's hard.
I can't stand it. Okay, let's see if we have any questions popping in. The Q8 or the X930E?
It's a good question. We're not 100% sure what's going to be. It's going to be a tight between these two because both are great TVs. And we haven't finalized everything about the Q8, so I won't make really a call here yet. Both are great, so it's hard to tell. But for gamers, probably the Samsung for the lower input lag. But for pure picture quality, it's a tight race between the two.
Okay. So here's the question I get all the time. I've been called an OLED fanboy. I've been called a Samsung shill. Every interesting name you can think of. So for the record, I am not paid by Samsung or LG or by anyone. This is a hobby for me. But I want you guys to know that Rtings is a legit business. And you're the founder of the company, right?
Yep, that's correct.
And so I'm an entrepreneur myself, and I put a lot of stake in startups, and I love them. I try to support them whenever I can, any way I can. And I don't know if you're comfortable sharing this, but you guys are a pretty small company. How many people would you say work there on a given day?
Right now we're 13.
Okay. And so it takes you a couple of weeks to do a review, or you're probably getting a little faster by now, right?
I hope we're getting faster, but it does take us a while to test. So it takes us a few weeks.
Right.
For example, the Q8, we received it 2 weeks ago, I believe. I'm not exactly sure of the date, and the review is not out yet. We're going to publish it soon. So yeah, it takes a while to test because it's hard. It's easy to come up with numbers. We can just pick a tool, get a number. But what's hard is how to make these numbers comparable and readable so that you can really not only when you retest it's the same value, but that after that you can use these to compare across models in a consistent way. And that's hard. That takes time. We need to validate a lot of results, to retest. Sometimes there's bugs, so that's delays a lot of things. So it's a long process.
Right. Yeah, and I've been watching you guys pick up traction pretty quickly, and I'm a huge fan, and that's why I'm really excited to have you guys on today. I think one thing I'd like to address is oftentimes we see people making these crazy comments, and what I'd ask the people watching, and if they happen to stumble into this later, is if anything ever happened and Rtings went away, you would notice it. They are a huge asset to this hobby, and it's really crazy that the TV space has become a hobby. Good Lord, it's an expensive one at that. This is a personal request of mine, but I want to ask the question first. How can people help Rtings? Because I know I would be, I don't want to say sad, but I would be probably a little upset if you guys didn't succeed. I'm not saying that's going to happen. You guys are doing a great job, but how can we help? What would you ask of us in the community?
It's a very good question. The main way to help is for people to give us comments, feedback of at different levels. We appreciate feedback, especially on our test methodology. So all our tests, how we measure, how we test is on the website, and people give us feedback on what we can improve or what new tests we can add or tests we can tweak so that it better represent what you really see. And so all feedback related to test methodology is more than welcome because we really want to improve those. Also, if people notice either errors or typos on the website, send us either emails or put in the comments. That kind of thing really helps us to improve and to do a better job at what we do. And most of our tests were actually proposed by people. For example, the Uniformity test was actually proposed a few years ago by someone that suggested us that we take pictures of the 50% gray. And now we're starting doing it for all TVs. So proposing new tests or ways to improve it, it's really the best way to help us.
Can we see the gray uniformity on those three?
Yeah, sure. I can put it.
I don't mean to put you on the spot.
So that's the 50% grayscale. I don't know if the camera is going to capture it well, but as with most LCD TVs, there are some uniformity issues, a few passes. So the darker spots, darker corners, usually sometimes brighter spots too. So that's the all TVs. So the Q9 at the bottom right, Z9 at the bottom left. At the top is the Q8 2018.
We saw a similar thing. Okay. Now, one question I had was earlier you mentioned you saw on one of my videos, you noticed that near the black bars, it was brighter on the OLED than the Q9. Any idea what was going on there?
Yep. So with local dimming, especially full arrays, so since it's going to try to darken the letterbox to make the good blacks there, it doesn't do it that accurately. So it's also going to darken part of the picture. So usually on full array local dimming TVs, you're going to see the top part of the picture and the bottom part of the picture when watching movies a little bit darker than the center. And sometimes it's noticeable, but it's going to depend on the scene. Whereas OLED, letterbox is going to be black, and just right after it's going to be a bit brighter than on LCD TVs.
Okay. And did Samsung change their algorithm from last year? Are you seeing a major difference in how the local dimming behaves?
We haven't finished testing the wall local dimming, but since these two are full array, they definitely behave differently than last year EdgeJet models.
Okay. And this is kind of the elephant in the room. I saw a dirty screen effect on both of them. And so are you guys seeing the same thing as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's depends on what level of dirty screen effect you're referring to, but both uniformity or all three, and in this case, it's not perfect.
Right.
But that would vary a lot per unit. So you might get lucky or not. And usually bigger sizes have more issues too. For us, we usually get 55-inch, so we don't always see it. But all LCD TVs, to some extent, have it, but it varies a lot.
You have a 55-inch Q9FN?
No, I was referring to the Q8.
Okay. Let's see if anyone has any questions. One question I've had is, what do you think about people coming from plasma? Do you think it's a blanket recommendation, go with OLED, or do you think someone should take a good look at one of these full array TVs coming from plasma?
It's going to depend. From plasma, it depends what you like about the plasma. There are some downside of plasma, but also some good sides. And it's going to depend what you like. If you like the view angle, then get the OLED. If you want though to compensate to be brighter, then definitely the QLEDs. But it's going to depend. I don't think there's a blanket statement on if you should upgrade from plasma to OLED.
Right.
Maybe for some people, but I wouldn't say everyone should do it. It's going to depend on your needs.
Right. Have you had a chance to measure the contrast of the Q9FN and the Q8FN?
The native contrast?
Either with local dimming on or off?
Yes, on Samsung TVs, though, you cannot turn off local dimming, so it causes a little bit of issues in some of our tests. Let me check if we have the numbers. Yeah, we don't have the final numbers yet. Because of the local dimming, we need to revalidate some numbers. It's a bit hard to get the native contrast on these, especially the Q9, and to get the native contrast on that to checkerboard patterns, it's a bit hard without local dimming. So we're going to need to revalidate before we get the final numbers.
And the final numbers are coming out when?
For the Q8, it's going to be end of this week. The Q9 is going to be beginning of next week.
So we'll see the full review on the Q8FN end of this week and the full review on the Q9FN next week.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. All right, let's see if anyone has any questions. So motion is such a hot topic, and my typical response is motion is subjective, especially when I have all three brands in the room: LG, Sony, well, four, right? TCL, well, five: Vizio, TCL, LG, and Samsung. They look slightly different to me. No matter what I do to the settings, I can never get them all to be the same unless I'm going for soap opera effect. I think when people refer to motion problems, they're usually talking about 24p content. Would you say?
It depends on which components they're referring to. Motion has a lot of components. Probably what you're referring to is more the stutter, which especially for OLED is a bit more obvious, and that is caused by the lack of motion blur. Since each transition is perfect, that means that each frame is going to kind of jumps completely perfectly to the next one. And with low frame rate, like movies at 24, each transitions, it's a little bit jarring.
Right.
So for some people on OLED, it's a bit bad for that. So usually what will help is if there's blur, that means LCD TV is going to be a bit much smoother. And worse the blur, usually it's going to be a lot smoother, which will help reduce that effect. Or the other option is to turn on the motion interpolation, which works well, but then has other kind of drawbacks.
Flickering.
Well, not necessarily flickering, but artifacts. Flickering is a separate subject in the motion category.
Can we talk about flickering?
Yeah. Flickering, usually the goal, as far as motion goes, is to reduce the eye persistence, which what it translates to is when you watch with your eye a moving object, because it's a fixed frame rate and the object jumps, that distance of the jump, when you follow it, that alone would create blur. That's why on OLED, you will see blur. You will perceive it as blur, even if there's no issue in terms of actual motion blur, just because the image is static, stays there for a while, then jumps, but your eyes continue, and you're going to see that distance as blur. But if you make the screen flicker, so if you have like black frame insertion on OLED, then you're only going to see it for part of the time, so part of that distance will be blur. So the more it flickers, usually translate to less motion blur, but it will depend on the pattern of flickering. If the flickering doesn't match the frame rate, then you might see doubling of the images or some other crazy patterns. So it gets complex, the flickering. In general, when you add flickering, motion is better, but it's not for everyone because some people it gets a headache from that. Also, sometimes at especially 60 Hz flickering, it's really noticeable when it flickers.
Black frame insertion. What do you think about it on the C8?
I mean, it works. Personally, I wouldn't use it because I don't like the flickering. So it depends. It's a trade-off of motion blur and the flickering. It's not for everyone. It's not like the holy grail of emotion. It's a trade-off.
So motion on the Z9D and motion on the Q9FN. How would you describe the motion on both of those TVs to someone who doesn't know anything about TVs?
Or, well, I have to preface this by our Z9D, the response time is longer on the 65-inch. It might not be the case for the 75, but on this case, the Z9D does look a lot smoother, which some people perceive it as more motion blurred. So, but that's for our unit. It might not be the same case for everyone for this. But it does look smoother because of this, the Z9.
Okay. All right, let me see if people have any questions. Sorry, guys, motion is a super important topic. It's hard to address, and so I just wanted to kind of have that discussion. Okay. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask it again if we haven't addressed it, so we'll have it kind of at the bottom of the queue. So let's talk about something that we kind of didn't plan on talking about, which would be the successor to the Z9D, possibly the Z9E or whatever they may end up calling it. Do you have any details on the successor to the Z9D?
Unfortunately, no, we don't have much details on that.
Okay. We have Cletus at work, and it's a little bit amazing. So if there's anything, if it's anything similar to that in a smaller version, it would be quite a sight to see. So what are the main differences between the Q9 and the Q8?
We don't have the exact list of full differences because we haven't finished the measurements, but definitely Q9 is brighter. So that's definitely a plus there. Most likely the local dimming also is a bit better, but we haven't confirmed if the difference is actually significant or not.
And the One Connect box might be significant for some people.
Definitely, it's not for everyone. It's pretty big, so it's not for everyone.
Yeah, it's a beast. Let's see what other questions are coming in. It's really hard to talk with headphones on. So if I'm saying things and there's a delay, it's because I hear myself in my ear. So sorry about that. eARC on the Q9F. So does the Q9FN have eARC?
Good question. I don't know.
I don't either. I didn't even consider looking for that in my testing. Okay, let's see what other questions people have. Is there a huge difference or a huge improvement over the 930E from the Q9? So if you had an X930E, do you think it would be worth it to jump up to the Q9FN?
It will depend on what you use it for. A difference that is definitely noticeable is the better reflections. And if you're a gamer, the lower input lag. For the rest, though, I mean, it's still a great TV to 930, so it's hard to. It's gonna be hard. We're gonna know more once we fully test it.
Right. Yeah, I think my blanket recommendation would be if you're a hardcore gamer, go for it. If not, I might sit out and wait to see what comes next year.
But there was a good question. Does BFI on C8 hurt HDR peak brightness? Yes, so just by the way it works, BFI will drop the brightness. How much will drop depends a bit, but usually it's half, depending on the length of the cycle, but you could say a half.
The woodpecker came back yesterday. Excalibur. I got footage of him. People thought I made that up, but maybe he worked for Sony. But my comment on the X930E or the Z9D, if you own those TVs, I probably would not upgrade.
Yeah, it's great TVs.
Daniel has a good question for you, Cedric. Do you prefer HDR on the Z9 or HDR on the Q9FN?
I haven't watched enough on the Q9 to make the call, so I won't be able to answer that today.
I've seen quite a bit of HDR on both. I would say they're pretty close, depending on your settings. If your TV, and this is actually a question I have for you, Cedric. You've seen my settings, right, and how awful they are. Typically, I'm looking to get a more interesting look. Almost, Thomas Kincaid is a terrible example, but I'm looking to have the image pop off the screen, so it really doesn't look as the director intended, and that's a look that I like. I like a lot of pop with my TVs, and the only TVs I've ever been able to achieve that with is the X930E, the Z9D, the 940E, and the Q9FN. Do you have any idea what's allowing the highlights to be lifted so much so that it's really straying from how the director intended? I like that. A lot of people don't, and people definitely call me out whenever they see my settings, but that's the look that I like.
It depends how do you define pop. Do you mean, so there's a different component that people use to refer to that word. Something that definitely helps is the brighter it is, the more pop it's gonna have. But also it could mean more saturated colors outside of what the director's intent is. And for that, there's usually a bunch of settings that we don't usually recommend because it goes away from the reference, but does help to oversaturate the color, which some people might like for depending on what you're watching.
Well, the one thing I don't like is when skin tones start to deviate from what looks natural. But I think for me, if someone's wearing a white shirt, I like the whites to be elevated a little bit so they almost look, I wouldn't want to say unnatural, but it looks surreal. It looks almost 3D. If we ever get together, I'll do my best to show you what I'm talking about. But the Q9FN was able to achieve that look for me, that 3D effect. And a lot of TV, like none of our OLEDs can do that. So I was just curious.
It might be the brightness, that depends. For the white, it's usually brightness, or some people prefer a colder color temperature, which usually gives a bit more pop, since a blue ore is usually perceived as more white. So that could help. But it could be just the higher peak brightness of the Q9.
Okay. Okay. Here's an interesting question. HDR10 Plus versus Dolby Vision. Now, I've seen both. I've looked at it side by side. I have my thoughts, but I'm curious to know if you've had a chance to evaluate the two formats.
We did a lot of side by side for this, on a lot of TVs. Technically, Dolby Vision is superior in a technical way. Does it translate for the current TVs? Not really, but it will depend on the actual mastering, how it's done, because sometimes the mastering will be done differently on Dolby Vision and HDR10, which skews a little bit the results. But generally, there's not that many difference with today's TVs, even though Dolby Vision is technically superior.
Right. And this is a little bit off topic, but and I want to come back to HDR in just a second. But before I forget, the X1 Extreme chip in the Sony TVs, what exactly is the X1 Extreme chip doing?
It's mostly marketing as far as the name goes. Actual stuff that we actually can measure and see when they're side by side. It refers to a bunch of different settings. For example, the motion flow setting. You can be referred to it, but it's mostly a marketing name. You will see it in some cases, since it's a blanket marketing name. Whatever fits into processing, they're gonna add it to this. It's hard to tell exactly what it is. It's like just a buzzword.
Right.
The advantage of Sony TVs, which is somewhat related to this, is you have a lot more options and settings. Sometimes it's hidden though. For example, different modes have different upscaling. If you use graphics, it's going to be a direct upscaling, whereas if you use movies, it's going to be more of a softer upscaling, which is something not exposed. So if you really care about all the kind of fine-tune the settings, Sony is a bit better for this, but sometimes it's a bit hidden. Like you wouldn't expect to change the mode to actually change something, even though all the rest of the settings are the same, but it is the case on Sony TVs.
What's the difference in Cinema Home and Cinema Pro?
If I'm not mistaken, the curve, the EOTF curve for HDR changed a little bit, especially the roll-off at the end, but I don't remember on top of my head what the actual change of the roll-off between these two.
Okay. Yeah, I think I saw a similar thing. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the gamma seemed to change a little bit between the two. But with the same settings, it's hard to change, and I think it's content dependent, or maybe frame rate dependent. I don't know.
It's probably depending on the scene. Since the Sony TVs, they do dynamic metadata, it will depend on the scene, and it's going to be affecting the highlights part.
Okay. And have you noticed anything on the Sony TVs with the custom mode? So is there anything unique about that mode?
Yes, it behaves a little bit differently. Again, in the same area, the roll-off is a little bit different, but I don't remember on top of my head what's the exact difference, but they usually all have slightly different changes there.
Okay. All right. Arthur Curry has a question. What's the difference between the Alpha 9 chip, Sony's X1 Extreme chip, and then Samsung's Q chip?
It's all marketing.
Yeah.
It really, I mean, it doesn't change much what name they use this year. It's going to change every year the name they use. But it refers to the whole ecosystem of settings. It's really, I mean, if these are more like nitpickings, does the processing change something? Yes, but it's more nitpickings. Like the overall picture quality won't change much. And what is best, at some point it becomes a preference, especially what you like, what settings you like. That changed a little bit. But overall, I mean, it's just marketing names.
I was thinking the same thing. One more question for you. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day. I mean, you're still at the office. It's 9:40 p.m. at night. I know you go to bed early and get up early. So I want to take one more question from the chat, and then you can ask me any questions if you have any. I doubt you do, because you have all the same TVs that we do, and you have 1,000 times more experience than probably all of us combined.
Oh, but actually I can ask you a question while you search for the question from the chat.
Yeah.
So out of the TVs that you have here, what is personally for you the one that you prefer for your usage?
So for me, versatility is important. I use the TV as a monitor. I use it for gaming. I use it to make my own HDR content. So I need the ability to do everything on a single TV. So I'm probably the worst person to ask, because I think when a lot of people are wanting to know which TV I have, they probably have different needs than I do. I have, like, the room that I'm in, there's no light in here. I have cinefoil on the windows, and it's completely blacked out in here. But in the other rooms, there's a ton of windows, right? And so these TVs are actually on rolling carts, so I can wheel them around to different rooms depending on what I'm doing. And if I go in the room, obviously with windows, I'm not taking any of the OLEDs. So, if you're in a bright room environment, or if you have both, right? If you watch during the day and at night, I think versatility is important. And so for me, I like the Q9FN as of today. The dirty screen effect is a little bit annoying, especially, and I think the reason I played Sea of Thieves game for you guys in one of my side-by-side videos is because I'm OCD, and that was the first time I played content that really bothered me with that TV. And so instead of calling it out and addressing it in kind of commentary, I just wanted you to see it. And if you didn't notice it, I don't want to call attention to flaws, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. So, I don't want to spend a ton of time pointing out all the flaws in TVs, because then you'll never buy anything.
All TVs have flaw, and it's very hard to make a choice.
Right. But for me right now, I still love the X930E. I think it was just such a great value. And last year, we predicted the B7 and the 930E would be the top 2 TVs of the year. And it's kind of funny that that's where you guys landed as well. And so I love the OLED equally. I mean, the image quality is just phenomenal. But I love the interesting pop that I get from the 930E, the Z9D, and the Q9FN. But again, the uniformity issues usually get me with the full array TVs. So just depends on what you can live with. What do you have? What TV do you have at home?
It's a good question. Right now, I have a Sony X850E.
I have the same TV.
But it was a hard choice to do, given my constraints that I had. One of the constraints that I had is I had to choose from. So we buy TVs, we keep them until they are discontinued, and then we resell them locally. So I had to choose from the last year's batch of TVs, and with my needs, it was a lot of thinking which one. So I ended up with the 850E.
Nice. I think we're probably at time. We're actually over time, and I'm sorry for keeping you so long. It's funny, people are just now starting to pour in. I guess it must be the time zone. But hopefully we can do this again soon, if you're up for it.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely was fun, and I hope it was useful for people.
Okay, awesome. So guys, this video will be public, and we'll leave it up for you guys to leave comments going forward. So if you have any questions for Cedric, feel free to leave a comment. But also keep in mind, Rtings review for the Q8FN is coming out when?
Thursday. If I'm not mistaken.
Okay, and then the Q9FN is next week.
Yes.
All right, cool. All right, guys, appreciate your time. Sorry for going over, and thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, and thanks for inviting me.
All right, guys, go to rtings.com. That's RTINGS.com. All right, guys, have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.